Hey guys, welcome to episode 6 of our series where we build a web application using Rust. In my previous episode, we basically worked on improving the server implementation a little bit. We looked at adding the redirect API, which is the main API which allows us to navigate to the URL corresponding to our UrlMap. Today we'll be looking at building the actual CRUD API. We'll be following a fairly RESTful sort of a pattern, which implies that we'll be utilizing HTTP verbs, convey the idea of exactly what we want to do. All right, without further ado, let's get started. So we're going to start at our routes. And in order for us to actually build an API, now one of the main things I am going to do for architecting array is that basically I will have a entirely separate API routes essentially, and what we'll be utilizing is and obviously just like we discussed previously, the pattern that we are going to be following is that all of our routes, including the API route, is going to expose the function called router, and then we'll utilize this in a sort of a meaningful way, leveraging the routing that the routerify gives us. Now, for the time being, without thinking a lot, what we're going to do is we'll just build a blank router in our API module, and we'll go with that. Now, so what we need is essentially there are a few things that we need. The first thing let's do is import our module API. Just to give you an idea, is basically source/server/routes is where all of our current routes are. Within routes, I now basically have created an API folder, and with the plan that I'll be keeping all of my APIs within the API folder. Okay. Now, given that, okay, before we go further, let's quickly fix our imports. The rest comes from routerify, error, and router itself. So this should do away with the errors that we see here. And now what we want to do is we want to utilize the scope API, and what this allows us to do is, like the documentation says, it allows us to mount a router onto another route, right? And so this is sort of the main entry point route, right? And so what we want to do is take the API routes, and we want to mount that entire route on top of the main route that we have, and we're going to mount it on /API, right? I mean, it kind of makes sense. I mean, essentially what we are saying is that for all endpoints on /API, they're going to be dedicated to the API router, and we're going to assume that they are being implemented. If not, then routerify obviously automatically gives us give back a 404. However, this is exactly how we're going to leverage it. One thing I'd like to add, considering that this is an API that we are going to build, the obvious data exchange format that we are going to use is going to be JSON, because I mean that's the standard these days, really. In order for us to be able to really work with JSON, to build JSONs and compose JSONs nicely, what we're going to do is add a library called CRUD JSON, which basically gives us all the tools necessary for us to be able to build, compose, even parse JSON, and then we leverage this hopefully in a sort of a nice way. So now we have a API router, right? It obviously doesn't do much yet, but it's a simple router that we have up and ready. Now, like I said, what we want to do is we want to create the UrlMaps CRUD API, right? And so for that purpose, what I'm going to do now is within our API, we are going to now create a UrlMaps router, and again that's going to have a models file. And again, in fact, let me just copy this entire thing, and this is exactly what our UrlMaps router looks like. For the time being, we'll improve this. So now that we are thinking about building our URL maps router, again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leverage the whole scope API to map my URL map router on top of slash URL maps within the API router, um, which means the route slash API slash URL maps is going to be the one that is going to be handled by the URL maps router. So let's look at that. Obviously right now it's an empty thing. What we're going to do is the pattern that I like to follow is we will create a handlers.rs file, and I'd like to keep all my sort of these handler functions within this file, and then we will basically just be referring to those within our actual router. Okay, and so just let's build a sort of an outline of exactly what our API will look like, right? So following the simple RESTful conventions, we're going to have a get on slash of our URL maps router, which is going to basically be, let's say, getting all my URL maps, right? That's what we want to do. Then we were going to have a post on our base route, and this is basically we're going to use this for create a URL map, right? Then we're also going to implement a slash key, which is going to be for get URL map, like in order for us to be able to get the details of a individual URL map object. Then we're going to have a put API for slash key. Again, this is going to be used for updating the URL map. And then we're going to have a delete slash key for us to be able to delete a URL map. So this is what our so let me fix this quickly. This is what it look like. This is what our RESTful API will look like. What I'm going to do is, for the time being, I'm going to comment all the others. We'll work on creating the first one, and we'll go with that, right? We'll first create the main one, and then gradually we'll one by one implement all of these others that are necessary or needed. Let's also load the handlers module. This should do it. Handlers module right now does not have anything. Let's implement the get URL maps function. I'm likely going to make some minor modifications to our existing routing API. I think there's some minor changes I'll do in order for us to be able to handle errors slightly better. And obviously we are going to implement a bunch of neat macros which will help us in building our JSON responses. Okay, so we want to get URL maps. Obviously this is going to get a request of with a body, and we want to return a result of a response of a body. Typically what I do is with an error, but however, in order to make things simpler and also in order to make error handling simple, I'm going to just use result, and this is essentially going to be coming from anyhow. So let's import that first. So anyhow result, and then we're going to import body request and response. So now let's think about what we want to do here. Obviously the first thing would be, let's get the sender. This gives us the sender. Let's quickly import some of these things. So Tokyo NPSC sender, right? And the message comes from our DB crate. So that should be good. So we have the sender. Yeah, I'm going to go and refer to our current API, right? Yeah, and we'll basically try to leverage some of these macros that we've built. However, we'll have to modify them because from the API we want to return JSON responses, and so we will make some minor modifications to this. So let's look at let's first look at the sender field JSON. Maybe I'm gonna give this just so that it makes a little bit more sense of how this is different. But however, even before any of this, let's first create the JSON response macro. So this is the macro that will help us basically build a JSON response, and I think I'm going to support a few use cases here. Let's first look at one with just a body, right? Then I'm going to have one which would have a status and a body. And then last but not the least, we will also have an optional nice edge case for handling errors. We'll see how we can do that. Let's get started on the first one. So what do we want? We want to build a response with just a body, which means it's going to be basically HTTP OK, and that's it. So let's look at what that looks like. So we'll use the response builder. We will add our header because we need the application JSON content type. Status right, and then we'll have a body. We will utilize CRUD JSON's string, convert it into a string, and unwrap, I believe. And the second variation of this, which includes the status, would be pretty straightforward, except I can optionally provide a different status than the default, which is HTTP OK. Let's use our JSON response. This is kind of like a recursive definition. Let's see. So our status is going to be hyper status code internal server error, and our body is going to be, oh yeah, let's use CRUD JSON, the JSON macro, because I want a valid JSON like this. I think this should work. I think we need to call to string on this. This is fine. Yeah, I think it is. So this is JSON response, and now let's look at how our sender failed would look like. Essentially, when let's say when we are actually, the whole sending fails, it typically implies that our database manager thread has stopped working, which is a no-go, right? It means basically our service is unresponsive. However, in a production environment application, we can make sure our health checks and probes and readiness probes are set up appropriately, which would then allow us to be able to detect if such an event does end up happening. We'll be able to restart our services so that we get back things and get them running as they should be. And so now let's look at, it'll look very similar to the one that we've already defined, right? With just few differences. This I can use. We'll use a JSON response. This is an unrecoverable error essentially. So I'm going to use I think this should be fine. Yeah, I think so. So now let's use the sender field macro. Now you're finally going to send get UrlMaps message to the database manager. What that requires is a response which the manager can use to send back the data. But let's create these, the sender and the responder. Yeah, it will be a one-shot channel. So we've given it the one-shot channel. This will be away, and then Just to add a little bit of context, we basically provide this as a in a logging, right? It sort of indicates exactly what is failed. Now that we've done that, then we'll basically have to be receiving the value. Yeah, so similar to this, I think we basically have to implement another macro which is going to be similar to the receive field, except handle or respond back with JSON. So I'm just thinking a little bit about this. I think I might and our body is going to be think sounds about right. So our UrlMap finally is going to be receive failed JSON of rx.await.unwrap, right? And then now finally we want to send back the URL map, and I think we can just utilize the body. We don't need anything else. Let's make it plural, or we can unwrap it. Let's just unwrap it. Wait, I don't need to. So yeah, okay, 1 second. So here we're returning it, but okay, one by one, we'll figure it out. Expected expression. I'll be in terms of so let's check. Let's see. Yeah. Cargo check. This is inside API. There is no result to using anyhow error. Let's change this whole thing here as well. Remove this. So hey, compiled successfully. So let's run it. And I'm going to use something pretty cool. So we're going to utilize curl, or I'll be able to make the actual API calls from within Vim, because why not? I have set up a few headers. -I gives us the response header. Silent, it shows that we don't have some weird craft. Let's just get yeah. So your mapper and Rust is running. Let's look at this. It says yes. Let's look now what are the URL mappers we have. Right now we just type GitHub, but we can see it. Great, so this is the API that we just built. We're able to see the list of all of them. Now if you were to go to this, yeah, it says not found because we haven't implemented any of the other APIs yet. Let's do that. So let's now look at, should be straightforward. Let's look at the get URL map API handler. So this guy needs a key. And the response. And then we get our URL map. Now if it, yeah, this is going to be not found. And let's respond. Looks good. Okay, we will go to our, and we're gonna enable this. Let's rebuild / restart. This is all of them. When we try to get the individual GitHub data, the mapper details, we're able to get that as well. Cool. That didn't require a lot of work. Let's now look at create UrlMap. Yeah, let's look at it. This will require a little bit of work. Now, in order for us to create UrlMap, what we will do is, since it's a post API, that means that the data, the key and the URL is actually going to be within our request body. Now, in order for us to be able to access that, we'll have to say, hey, my request should be mutable. And then now we're able to use request to get body mute. This is required, which gives us basically a mutable reference. Then what we want to do is then we can get the URL map bytes using a method called 2bytes. 2byte comes from hyper, it's inside body. Okay, so if you see, 2body gives us a result, then we do not need to do a wait or anything really. That's fine. So this gives us the bytes. Now in order to actually get the URL map object, we'll utilize the JSON from slice, and this basically allows us to parse and parse the URL map byte. Here is the result. Let's just use this. Yeah. So we have the URL map. Now we need to create. So again, that should be straightforward. We have a one-shot channel. Then let's do the center field. Yeah, we need to pass the URL map, and we need to give it the responder. We have this. Let's try to get back the URL map from this as a precautionary thing. Now, instead of not found, I think it should be unprocessable entity. With URL map. Let's check. Okay, we haven't imported URL map. Oh, let's enable it. Let's enable it. Right now we just have GitHub. Hey, it says it got created. Let's look at. Yes, so when we look at our URL maps, now we have two entries, one for GitHub and one for LinkedIn. Let's look at update URL map. We need to update the URL for a given key. Now our body will really contain only the URL. So for that purpose, I'll create a temporary struct. We're going to name it as URL map URL. Okay, we have enabled the route. So let's now finally implement the delete API. We have a key. So we have a center. restart. Great, so it was successfully able to remove LinkedIn. Awesome. So we've implemented the entire CRUD API now. I think this looks good. Alright guys, thank you so much for the continued support. Please do subscribe, hit the bell icon, share, comment, and like the video.